Okay, well, we've got a quorum of the committee here, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. And I will just look to see if there are any disclosures of interest. Seeing none, let's move on to the consent items. There are 12 of them before us. I wonder, colleagues, if any of them you'd like to pull out for discussion. Councillor Morgan.
3, 7, 11.
Anyone else want to pull prime numbers?
Item number 5, please.
I'm afraid that's not a prime number, sorry. Any other ones, colleagues?
There are 13 of them. I just wanted to know that.
13?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh no, sorry, 12 because the number 1 is constant. Sorry, you're right.
Okay, so I have 3, 4, 5, 7, and 11 pulled.
I can just ask a question.
Let's just pull them, that's no problem. And we'll deal with 2, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, no, sorry, 12 and 13 altogether. We're just gonna add 13 there, colleagues. And on those items, 2, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 shouldn't be there. Take 11, yeah. 12 and 13, are there any questions or comments on those that are being moved together? Okay, I don't see any comments. I'm just going to say a couple of things. One, for the debenture issuance, I'm glad to see that we're doing this now, you know, at least getting started with the authorization so that we can borrow at the appropriate time. I know the interest rate environment has changed a bit since we dealt with this last year, but I know that providing the flexibility to our staff and the people taking us on the capital markets is going to really help get the best rate that we can. And I'm glad that we're doing that now. And also on number 10, applying for the SCM Municipal Asset Management Grant, I think is very smart. You know, hopefully we can get approved for that, help to cover some of the costs of the next round of corporate asset management. See if there's any other comments. Linda, go ahead.
Yes, and just in connection with the debenture issuance, I just wanted to put the members on notice that as per usual process, I may need to work with the chair to call a special meeting for that process because we have to keep the timelines tight with council approval.
I've heard the chair is reasonable, so. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's open it up for voting.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, any staff who are here for those items, feel free. Thanks for being here. Item number 3, this is the changes to the Employment Standards Act and the Labor Relations Act. I believe it was pulled by Councillor Morgan. Go ahead.
So first off, I wanted to thank our staff for Mr. Coxhead and Ms. Hagan and whoever else helped out for pulling together all this information. I think it's very valuable for us to see, you know, the full extent of legislative changes when other levels of government, you know, make changes to the way that we're required to do things. It's great to have a bit of a comprehensive look at the way that the impacts are spread across the organization. and how that works. At the end, in the potential implications, it talks about financial implications associated with the legislative amendments will be funded through the corporation's approved operating budgets. We already have approved budgets, and so are we foreseeing any sort of changes to the budget that we've already kind of allocated or projected in the multi-year budget process?
Through the chair, no, we are not foreseeing any changes to the budget as it's been approved. We will continue to monitor that, and if there are any changes, we would bring that forward in 2019.
That was the only question I had.
Okay, let's get 3 moved and seconded. Any other comments? If not, let's open the vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
I see that both 4 and 5 were pulled. If it's 4 questions, I wonder if we could do them together. They're on sort of related topics, but if they're not and people want to vote differently or something like that, we can deal with them separately. I just looked at committee. Okay, let's have 4 and 5 up on the screen and then I'll look for comments. Committee members? Councillor Zaidman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, very much appreciate staff's updated, or new, I should say, workforce census and looking at some community comparators. One thing that I found pretty heartening was it's not always easy to get people to voluntarily give some information like this, which can be quite helpful to us. But knowing that 1,729 employees out of potential 2,900 gave info and input was, I think, quite tremendous, and gives us a much better picture of where we are at as a municipality overall, but also as a work organization. And one thing which sort of caught my eye was the fact that 45% of our internal workforce is over the age of 45, and I think specifically between the 45 and 64 demographic. Just wondering if staff can comment just briefly on some of the things that are being done that we're doing internally for succession planning, because obviously that's a pretty significant number, and maybe that means more opportunities for people in our community in the future. If I might, through the chair, just speaking about succession planning, and if anyone on staff that's looking to do that.
So thank you, and we've highlighted that very area, succession planning, workforce management, and capacity are issues for us going forward, given that we also recognize a significant number of those folks are near retirement in the next 3 to 5 years as well. So in answer to your question, we're well aware of it. We're still trying to understand the implications and working through processes to understand it better and figure out what our responses will be.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Good afternoon. Sorry for my tardiness. Just on number 4, there's just more at a higher level from a completeness statistical perspective. I didn't see a total N in terms of number of respondents. All the percentages are there. I'm on, someone already asked that question? Is it in there? Okay, I apologize, but I didn't see it in Appendix B, so I was looking for the percentage of respondents on that. So my colleague says it's in there, which is great. The other part that I found, it kind of goes with Councillor Zaidman's question around age. I didn't find the breakdown particularly helpful. I thought that the categories were too large. So maybe we can take a look at that going forward. It's not a hard fix. It's just from sort of the kind of the statistical geek in me. If we could break it down, because when you got a small group and then you have a large group, it should be consistent, and that would help, particularly in the larger older age group. It's too big between the middle, the 40s and the 50s. It just needs to be broken down a little bit more. Give us ability to say who's kind of in their mid-career, and then who's into the sunset of their career, and then whose career's over and still's working. I don't know. So that just help us to do that analysis. Thanks.
Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for allowing me to speak at this committee meeting. I want to just address a few things in item number 4. I'll take the easiest one first, and I'll just ask staff if they would kindly make a correction on page 18 to the length of service under employment status for 21 to 30 years of age. I'm sure you mean 17.6, not 176%. I don't mean to be critical, it's just that if this goes somewhere, it's worth the while correcting it. You got it there? Staff? Got it? On page 18, the table, the lower table, under 21 to 30, you got 170. Okay. So first of all, I want to thank staff for this. I think it's very well documented information, and I'm glad that we got to the point where we did this. We did this before, and it's always difficult. You'll never get 100%. So I think that getting 59 or 60% response is pretty good under the circumstances. I want to focus, though, on immigrants and visible minorities or ethnicity. On page 15 and 16, we talk about immigrants, and 16, we talk about race and ethnicity. It's a little, it's not confusing here if you know what we're talking about, but perhaps we need a little bit of explanation because I'm sure that there's some overlap. Because the immigrants would include some of the ethnicity, and some of the ethnicity were born here, so they would not consider themselves immigrants. So I don't want people to think that that 22% immigrants is the same as the 19.8% visible minority. They might be, some might be the same, some may not. So I'm not going to address the immigrants right now. What I want to talk about a little bit is to do with respect to the visible minority. And the reason I want to talk about that is because over the past 20 years, and probably more, the visible minority proportion in London has been increasing to the point where it has doubled, because the census of 2011, I'm sure, said 8.9%. Now we're at 19.8%. And I do believe these numbers. 19.8% is 1/5 of the population. But we are still not there with the percentage of visible minority in our workforce. We're only 14.5 according to this information. And bear in mind that this is only the people who wanted to respond. If you really want to be really stiff about this, you may find that most of the people who respond would be, most of the visible minority would have responded, hopefully. So it shows a different proportion. So I'm a little concerned about that because we've been working at this ever since I've been on council. And about 12 years ago, I brought a motion forward to ask staff what they were going to do with respect to increasing the percentage of visible minority in the workforce and the workplace. And I think that we've made steady progress, but I don't think that we've made enough progress. And I don't know the answer yet, but I do think that staff is very conscious of this at this point in time, and I think that they're going to work on this. So I'm giving them credit. I'm not criticizing in any way whatsoever. Two things, for example, that they've been very, very successful at is with respect to engineers in training and new graduates, not just engineers, but new graduates in general. If you look across the board over the past number of years, the number of people that we have taken on, many of them are visible minorities. And of course, most of you know about the foreign trained professionals that we at this council instigated 2 years ago that started last year, which is coming along nicely now. And I stress that now because it was not before, and I've been very critical about that, but you all know about that. So the point I want to stress here, though, is that we must not sit back and say that the 14.5% visible minority with respect to the 19.8% of the population out there. I do believe that the City of London needs to set the lead when it comes to this, and I believe that the rest of the population have always looked at what we are doing here in London. And when we do poorly in this area, the population is going to do poorly. Part of the reason why we get many and a large proportion of our young visible minorities leaving is exactly this, because nobody wants to hire them. And I say that very squarely, unashamedly, and disappointingly. So we lose them because they go off to places like Toronto, because they can't find employment here. And I do believe that the process that we are doing at the city here will help. But I just want to say, 2 years ago, a general manager sat in that very seat and say, not even 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I'm going to be bold about this. I haven't seen that change. I believe that the temperature of that has changed over the past 6 months through my discussion with staff. But I think that we need to take that boldness on. I don't know how many of you remember I'll be very quick, Mr. Chair. I don't know how many of you, I know you're not telling me to quit, but I feel like I'm taking up your time, and I'm just a guest here. But if you remember last year, we had a number of things happening. We had the Minister of Ethnicity, Culture, whatever it is from the province came through here and did a survey, and he came up with a plan. And there's a plan to improve all this within the provincial government legislature. And also CBC had a program at the World Performance Hall where we talk about this very boldness in the city, including the Corporation of the City of London. What I'd like to see is that the public out there could see that we are being bold. When they look at the 14.5% in comparison to the 19.8%, they're not going to see boldness, because the public hasn't been following this like I have. I have been following this even before I came on City Council. And so I'm throwing those thoughts out because I think we need to be vigilant. I'm not saying that we must take jobs away from anybody to give to visible minority. I'm saying that we need to be vigilant to say that intentionally, we must ensure that we consider more visible minorities in our workforce and our workplace. And having said that, Mr. Chair, again, I say to staff that I'm really grateful for the way this is put out, and I think that you may hear more from the public in this regard once people begin to absorb it. And I hope that that DIAC take this and make some recommendation ultimately. Thank you very much, and thanks to staff for the report.
Thank you, Councillor Usher. Any other comments or discussion in committee? Just from the chair, I would like to say I really appreciate the additional breakdowns by area. You know, I know that's something we discussed earlier on to say, well, okay, these are the overall numbers, but how does it look across different areas of the organization and at different levels in the organization? People have direct reports, people who don't. And I think it's helpful for understanding the overall picture of the workforce in the corporation. Obviously, there's a lot of different jobs and people doing different things. There's higher turnover areas and areas where there's not a lot of turnover at all. And I think this kind of information really helps us plan and prioritize that reach efforts that we're making to be a bit more targeted and specific. And I think this kind of frequency of reporting too is really helpful. I know we worked on the 2011 numbers because that's what we had available. Updating it so we can get a sense of how we're tracking with 2016, I think is really good, and I think we're making good progress on this front. Councillor Van Holst.
Yeah, thank you very much. And the breakdown was interesting, although in many places the numbers were so small we couldn't really get a look at it. In engineering, you know, I know anecdotally in the city we've got some. We know that we're making progress there in terms of women in engineering. I remember because it's often a disappointment to see those numbers. When I entered first year engineering at Waterloo, I was extremely disappointed at seeing those numbers. Maybe for other reasons, but I, you know, as that's changing, that's encouraging to see too. So thank you. I realize we are making gains there, and we're going to be hiring quite a few people for the shift program, and I think we'll get to see in a large hiring some some shifts in all of these, areas.
Okay, that's been moved. Oh, we need a mover and a seconder for those two. Let's open the vote.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to item number 7. Assessment growth for 2018, changes in taxable phase-in values and shifts in taxation as a result of reassessment. Councillor Morgan.
Probably not surprising that I wanted to talk about assessment growth, even if no one else does. I had a question and then a comment on the report. The question on the report is related to a paragraph that talks about the differences between the 2017 and 2018 assessment growth because of the reclassification of multi-residential properties. And it said a similar adjustment of weighted assessment has not occurred for 2018. Should I read that as there hasn't been the conversions, or we just haven't done the weighting of the assessment in the report yet?
With respect to your question, it's just the volume of conversions is much lower than it was in the previous year, so it's not a big impact.
Great. I actually see that as positive news. As we narrow the tax ratios, perhaps there is less financial incentive to convert. And so I think that's a positive. I wanted to ask that clarification. What I will say is another positive in the report, because I know that assessment growth is very complex, and we talk about trying to be as plain language as possible, despite the fact that you can only do so much with the assessment growth from a plain language perspective. I really appreciate the section of the report that outlines and explains Schedule D. And for anybody interested in how changes in property values impact your own tax rate, even if the city makes no changes at all. Reading that paragraph and then looking at Schedule D provides a good explanation of how tax rates change across tax classes even when the municipality does nothing because of the changing values. And the changing values relative to the other tax classes. So when I look at Schedule D, I see the pressure areas where there's upward pressure because they're appreciating at faster rates in the commercial, farmland, and multi-residential space, whereas it's coming down in the regular residential space. And obviously our tax ratio policy, as well as where the education tax weighs in, is something we'll discuss later in the year. But I think it's a good place to see, how your tax rates are changing across the different classes, even before the municipality makes any changes. So I appreciate the report, and if I said anything incorrect, please feel free to correct me.
Always nice then, with an open invitation to be corrected. No one's taking you up on it. Okay. Any other comments about assessment? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, of course, we had some unexpected assessment growth this year, which certainly helped us with the budget. And I think it's extremely important looking back at the at Figure 1. Back in 2009, there was almost 2.3% growth there. I know that the then running mayor had a plan to avoid tax increases, but it was based on a 2% growth. We didn't quite get that, but you could certainly see how if that kind of growth happened, we'd be doing very well in the city. So this is probably a conversation for some other time, but nevertheless, I thought I may ask through the chair, through you, the kinds of things cities do to spur and encourage assessment growth. What can we do to typically to try to make this happen to a greater extent?
Mr. Hill.
Through the chair. So there's a whole host of things that council can do. One is your whole planning and development processes, making them as efficient as possible, and also creating enough space through your growth management implementation strategy. All those types of pieces we have in place. Similarly, looking at your development charges, which is something that come at you. You have policies surrounding that, and obviously, if you're competing with surrounding areas that have lower development charges, then that can be an area of concern in terms of development in the areas. The other thing is the state of the local economy, and making sure that you've got a diversified economy, making sure it's always built, so keeping your taxes under control and doing everything you can to make this place as attractive and as affordable to live in and to set up a business in as possible. That will all help with assessment growth. And then the state of the general economy, which is something you don't have much control over, but the local economy certainly you can influence, and the environment in which businesses can develop and homes can be built, you can influence as well. So that's about it.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate the answer. That's helpful. And maybe we can spend some time thinking about those things and strategizing a bit in the future.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. I'm going to open up for voting.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to item number 11, the Corporate Asset Management Plan 2017 review. I believe Mr. Shahada is here to speak to it. Right there. Hi, welcome to committee. And I just wonder, for the person who pulled this report, what kind of questions you have? Go ahead.
Great. I have no questions. I have a couple comments. First off, I want to highlight, well, first off, thank you for the report. I appreciate you being here to answer any potential questions. But I do want to highlight the actions taken in this report under the Corporate Asset Management Plan from 2014. It's a good example of when we talk about successive years of good, sound fiscal planning and different councils being involved in that and different treasurers being involved in it. I think there's a couple of good examples in this report of that sustained, fiscal discipline. On page 65 of the agenda, I think it's the page 5 of the report, it highlights a couple of actions that have been taken even over the last few years. Some that are significant and are showing positive outcomes are the shift to, on the capital levy side of things, to increase that capital levy, more pay-as-you-go financing, ensuring that we're not borrowing as much for the short-term capital needs that we may have. That's certainly a positive, and the size of the change over the period we're talking about, I think, is not insignificant. Also, the moving to build a reserve fund for addressing the infrastructure gap. I remember being asked about this earlier in the year, or actually it was just about a month ago, and I think the media was trying to do a story relating our investments in infrastructure gap to like less spending, and in some cases that has happened where we've been able to change the structure of a street and lead to less water main breaks. Obviously, the long-term impacts will not be seen for many years, but the fact that we have invested significantly in that reserve fund, even in this term of council, through the $6 million plus the $750,000 through the strategic priorities, as well as changes to our surplus and assessment growth policy to ensure that we're directing good portions of any excess money into the infrastructure gap, which will lead to positive benefits down the road, is something to highlight and not just let go and let by in a report. I think it's something that will pay dividends many years from now. The council of the day may not realize why they're in great fiscal shape that they have, but it will be because of that sustained fiscal discipline by all the councils that came before them and by our staff keeping us on track with items like this. And that's contained kind of in this report in a way I didn't want to let it go.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask a question about figure 3. It's on page 62. So just looking at some of the trends, or between last year and this year, are the overall conditions very poor, remains at 2.5%, poor is at 13.5%, and then we had, looks like about 1% of our fare we managed to push into good, and then about 4.5% of the things we considered very good slipped down into just good. And that in total, that seems like we may be going in the wrong direction, but I was hoping for just a little more description of what happened this year, how some of those numbers changed, and what's possible. What do we need to do to get at the 2.5% that's on the bottom? It looks like we've made some gains in the past few years, but removing that, because of course, that's what people often notice, right? It's the things that are really bad, catch your eye more so. So if through the chair, if you would, I'd appreciate for a little description of that.
I see Mr. Shahada has come up and also Mr. Soldo. I think you're asking about the road structures and traffic condition, and noting that since 2013, we had 47% good or better. Now we're 52% good or better. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start and Mr. Soldo can correct me or add. So the way it works, every year we do inspect portion of our roads, and every 2 years, I say half of our road network, and every 2 years we inspect our bridges. What we have done is we took the latest information from the bridge management system and from the road pavement quality index, and we updated those numbers. So every year when you look into what we have done when we build the new roads and we update the bridges, they come to be very good, and smaller portion decrease in the very poor, and that is evident. Typically, the difference between very good and good could be a little bit blur, so the percentage between good and very good won't be a concern. I would suggest the percentage of very poor and poor would be something that we need to focus on. And based on the trend that we are seeing from when we started back in 2012, 2013 data, we are heading in the right direction. There's still some roads that need to be fixed. There's still some stuff that we need to do. But from the data that we have right now, I think we are going in the right direction.
Thank you very much. That's helpful, especially the point about checking some of these things every other year, because it's going to change every 2 years. We're not necessarily going to get a straight line. So my comparing 2016 to 2017 wouldn't have been quite accurate in the conclusion I drew here. Perhaps I would ask another question then, just in the last year then, what kinds of projects we've done that would have seen something in the poor or very poor area move up? So which projects are we taking the very visible things or the problematic things and solving those?
That one definitely sounds like a question for Mr. Soldo. You're right behind Mr. Coxhead, so I can't see how eager you are to answer. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll just reiterate that the trend actually is very positive, and every year we focus on the very poor. We don't work on things that are in better condition. We look at the sections of roadway which happen to be the lowest pavement quality index and focus on them. So we come up with a plan every year to deal with the worst condition roadways, but roadways are a continuous improvement. As you improve the roadways which are very poor, other ones fall into that category. Some of the other assets underneath this one figure include things such as bridges, and again, they deteriorate based on a gradual deterioration curve as well. So projects, you asked for specific projects. I would say every single project that we do is focused on the very poor as a first priority in terms of the transportation program.
Okay, thanks. Then maybe one last question. The bridges, of course, those are things that are replaced very infrequently, and as you said, they'll just degrade gradually, and we know everything does that. I don't exclude myself. So when would we look to make a change for a bridge? We'll decide it's going to change, but that change, will that happen when it's in the poor, or will it happen when it's very poor? Is that, how low will something like a bridge get before we make that change?
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillor. In terms of bridges, they have a certain lifespan, between 50 to 70 years, depending on the bridge itself. In the report, we do refer to what we see in the future on the horizon coming. A lot of these bridges are going to be in need of repair. Most of them are approaching their end of life in terms of 50 years. Most of them were built in the 60s and 70s. So that is a need that we see coming down. Every 2 years, we undertake an assessment of every single bridge. It's regulated for us by the province. We assess each bridge, determine if there's any holding strategies that we can potentially put in place for those bridges, and if there's any major deterioration that we need to address. So we have a 10-year plan which identifies which bridges need to be done at which time based on the assessment we undertake every 2 years, and we update that on a biannual basis.
Thank you.
Thank you, and just a couple brief comments for specific projects. I can tell you in Ward 4, those parking lots in Old East Village, those were long overdue for replacement, and they've certainly gone from very poor to outstanding. There's a little bit of work left to do next year, but that's an example of closing the infrastructure gap on parking. Blackfriars Bridge, we might recall, was lifted out of place and is going in to be rehabbed and come back, and it obviously was in pretty tough condition in the sense we couldn't put people on it anymore, and now it's going to come back refurbished and in great condition, I'm sure. So there's been a lot of infrastructure projects. I know people have gone through the pain of the construction that causes, but it's part of the infrastructure renewal program. And I'm certainly glad to see it's going in that direction. That's a tough ship to turn at all, and it takes a lot to move it in the right direction. So I appreciate the report. I don't see any other questions. Let's open up for voting.
Motion carries 5-0.
That brings us to the end of the consent items. We do have 3 other items, 2 under items for direction and 1 which is a piece of additional business, a letter from the mayor. I'd like to go to item number 14, which is the public submission about the LGBTQ2 public apology. This is a submission from Mr. Lewis. I see him at the back. There's also a delegation request from Mr. Lewis, and I'd like to first just deal with the delegation request. Would we like to hear from Mr. Lewis, and if so, is someone willing to move a motion to that effect? See a mover. Is there a seconder for that? I'll get it up on the screen. Okay, that's there to be moved. See a seconder, okay. Any discussion on the delegation request itself? Councillor Inholst?
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I thought I had no problem with any of this, but then I did think, just in the way this is coming forward, we don't want to create a mechanism for private political forums in an election year. I mean, I can see that here, someone bringing forth a motion and then asking for delegation status. Any mayoral candidates can come forward there with their BRT motion and then ask to speak to council about it and lecture us and tell us why their idea is so good at the cost of our city staff and resources. So I just wonder about that. Generally, it's a councillor that brings forward a motion and then the public talks to it. So that was my only concern. Well, it's one of a number of concerns going forward. So that this just seemed a little odd in the way we generally approach things. So.
Any other discussion, colleagues? Certainly approving or not approving the delegation request is something we do at committee pretty regularly. Okay, so we've got it up there. We'll see if anyone. Opening the vote.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, Mr. Lewis, if you'd like to come up, if you try and keep your remarks to 5 minutes, that'd be appreciated. Thank you for sending in the letter in advance, so we see where you're going.
I'm
Deputy
happy
Mayor.
to hear from Mr. Lewis, but his letter was really clear, so I don't have a whole lot of clarification that's needed, just so you know. It was well written, so pretty obvious, frankly.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Deputy Mayor Hubert. And primarily, I asked for delegation status simply if any members of committee had questions to ask of me. I also want to say, following up on the workplace inclusion and diversity report that you were just dealing with from staff, I think that this goes hand in hand with that. And Councillor Usher, you're quite right. We still have a lot of work to do and to be bold in inclusivity in this city, both for the LGBTQ plus community and for persons of color and new immigrants. So thank you for those comments there. Really, Mr. Chair, through you, I just wanted the opportunity to address any questions that the committee may have arising from the letter. I'm glad that you've all had a chance to read it. And I will just close my remarks with that because, as Deputy Mayor Hubert said, I said most of what I had to say in the letter.
I think the committee appreciates a short delegation. That's great. Any questions for Mr. Lewis while he's here? Councilor Morgan.
Yes, I only have one question, and then, assuming that goes well, I'd be happy to move your motion. Did you have an opportunity to speak to the mayor about the motion you're bringing forward?
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. And I did actually speak to the mayor on the Friday that the public apology was delivered on the steps of City Hall in the reception afterwards down in Committee Room 1. So he was aware that this is coming forward, and he indicated to me at that time that he would be quite happy to be supportive of this as well. This is, coming full circle and closing the loop.
Any other comments? There's a motion that's been suggested by Mr. Lewis. It's up on the screen. I'd look to see if there's a mover and a seconder, and then we can have any further discussion. Yep, Councilor Morgan.
So I'm happy to move this, and I think Mr. Lewis has taken the right approach here by recognizing what the mayor has done. I think it's highly appropriate for the office of the mayor of the City of London, which is an office in the city, to take such actions. And I also appreciate that Mr. Lewis has pointed out that the government of London as well, through resolution of municipal council, may also want to take some action by ratifying the mayor's apology and taking that stance on herself. I think we all share the words, well, we can share with our votes, but I certainly, share the words of apology for some of the actions that have been taken in the past. It was a course of action that was upheld by the council, and I think having council make a motion is an appropriate way to provide some closure to that particular action in the past as well. So I appreciate you bringing this forward, and we'll be voting for it.
Any other comments? Councilor Zaifman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thanks to Mr. Lewis for bringing this forward. It's nice for council to have an opportunity, I think, to sort of echo and follow through on some of the thoughts and comments from the mayor and the apology as well. This is something which, just as a citizen living in the city, I think has been sort of sitting as a cloud over the city for quite some time. And I know that myself and some other councillors were there on the Friday for the apology because it's a pretty significant moment for our city. It's something that I think we're trying to turn the corner on and making sure that our city is seen as an open and diverse community that's accepting of all. And I think this is a good way going forward of helping ensure that and knowing that we are doing that. And as a council, looking to do that and support that as well. London is a very diverse and very large community with many different sectors. And as Mr. Lewis mentioned with the report from staff recently on the workforce census, it's a major part of our own workforce here at the City of London as well as across the city. And so happy to be seconding this today.
Any other comments? Okay, just from the chair, I'll just say I think this is the right thing to do. I'm glad as a council, hopefully when we deal with it at council, we can express on behalf of the entire council that we're sorry for refusing to proclaim gay pride back in 1995. It's not the only thing that has been done wrong over the years, and I think we need to move forward. Part of moving forward is recognizing mistakes that have been made in the past and the poor way that people were treated and been made to feel. And I do want to recognize there were some councillors who, when it came to council, supported the idea of proclaiming Gay Pride Week at that time. And Diane Whiteside was one of them. Megan Walker, I know, was at the announcement. Sheila Davenport. There were a number of councillors, I think only 5, who did support it at that time. And I think as a result, I think it's appropriate for council to kind of confirm and affirm what the mayor has done, which is to apologize for that. Councillor Van Holst.
Yeah, thank you. And it seems like this may be in the backwards order, but I think the mayor's timing was very good. It would have been very awkward for London, where's the prime minister to come and apologize for us or something like that.
Okay, let's open to the vote.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Thanks, committee. That brings us to item number 15. This is a request for designation of the Latin Gastronomy Festival as a municipally significant event. I would just look to see if there's a mover and a seconder for that before we get into any discussion. Okay, it's up on the screen. Looking for a seconder. There we go. Any discussion? Okay, we'll open up the vote. You sure can.
Pretty much. Most of you know that I don't have a problem with doing these things, recognizing these organizations, these activities. But it seems to me that we're doing something and we know absolutely nothing about the organization and what this stands for. I know that I read this thing and I still don't understand who they are. And I'm sure that this is probably somebody whom I know, but they haven't approached me about it. I'm just concerned, not about this particular one, but these in general. We seem, and I know that staff is working on some protocol for to make it easier for us, hopefully. It's just that everybody who comes forward, we approve. And I don't know if we know who we're approving and what we're approving for. So I just want to make that clear because I think that we need something to go by when we say yay or nay with these activities.
Well, certainly we've discussed this many times at committee, and I know the staff are working on it. I'm just going to go to Deputy Mayor Hubert to see if he has anything to add.
Through you to the clerk, when can we put Councillor Usher out of his misery and have an answer on this? Because really, it's been coming and coming for well over a year now, and it can't be quite that complicated.
The matter itself is not that complicated. There is some investigation to do. Fortunately, we've had other projects that have come and superseded it, such as the switching of our agenda system, preparation for ranked ballots. So unfortunately, there's just been a number of things that keeps going up and down on the pile of priorities. I can't give you any other explanation than that. That's the truth. That's what's happening, and we'll do our best to get it as soon as we can.
Councillor Van Holst.
Those are interesting looks, Mr. Chair. So it's just essentially a delegated authority that Councillor Usher is looking for and we're investigating, is that right?
That's correct. Our plan is to develop a form for anybody who wishes to seek that designation and set some criteria, which we would come to council and get council to approve what criteria they'd be comfortable with in terms of approvals. Once that's set, we would also have them then delegate authority to do that, sign that approval via the city clerk. So you would not be having these on your future agendas at all. You would be giving us our marching orders in terms of what types of events council would be willing to approve, and we would approve those events on that basis.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm happy to support this one. It is gastronomy, and you know, there's nothing like looking up at the sky and thinking, wow, those were good tacos. So, thank you.
Okay, we're voting now.
Quickly.
Oh, sorry.
Motion carries 5-0.
That brings us to item number 16. This is an added item, says council member submission. It's from the mayor. It's related to the Canada Strong Cities Exchange Program and the United States of America Conference of Mayors 86th Winter Meeting. There's a letter there advising us that the mayor will be attending and that the costs are being covered by the American Embassy. There's a letter here to be received essentially, and I just look to see if there's a motion to that effect and then any discussion. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
I'll move receipt and note, I'm thankful that the U.S. government's back up and running so that they can actually pay the bills for the mayor to be there, so.
Any other discussion? Councilor Morgan.
Yes, I wanted to make a couple comments about this and then potentially add or replace the motion of whatever's appropriate at the time. First off, I appreciate that the mayor is going, and I'm glad that the U.S. group of mayors, I think they're called the USCM, have invited Canadian mayors to come and talk. It's a very appropriate time to do so. With the negotiations with the North American Free Trade Agreement happening right now, and some days it seems like it's going well, and other days it doesn't. Being able to build connections with municipalities and leaders of other cities is a very important thing for us to do, because those business connections exist between us and other cities in the U.S., and they are at risk depending on how this negotiation goes, particularly in southwestern Ontario, where there is great risk to the structure of the free trade agreement and the impacts it would have, whether it exists in a different form or doesn't exist at all. I think our business community should and has been alerted to this and working on this. I think this needs to be one of our top priorities to ensure that we're well aware of what's happening. So I'm glad the mayor is going. I had a chance to talk with our staff a little bit about the activities and what's happening, as well as the mayor shared an email with us with some information. I'm glad that we have our government relations, our representative from government relations there to support the activities. I know that they're going to be talking about London and the impacts on London, but also that there are going to be other items that are discussed at this conference, whether it's public infrastructure, housing, climate change, opioid crises, which impact all cities across North America. I think there's going to be a lot of good discussions that happen there, which leads me to my request of the mayor, and that is that he would report back to the Corporate Services Committee on the activities of the conference, much like Councillor Usher does when he goes to FCM and brings us some information back. He certainly has his staff support there that could assist him with that. And so I'm not sure when it would be appropriate, but I did provide some language to the clerks, which they then subsequently improved for me, that basically says that Mayor Brown be requested to report back at the February 6, 2018 meeting of the Corporate Services Committee with a summary of the meetings he attended in Washington, D.C. from January 23rd to 27th, 2018 as part of the Canadian Strong Cities Exchange Program delegation.
Okay, it's probably helpful if we can see that language up on the screen. There we go. So with the suggestion from Councillor Morgan, it would be to receive it and then also request for the mayor to report back at our next meeting, it looks like, with the summary of the meetings. Okay. Everyone take your time to make sure you can read that, and then we'll see if there's a seconder for the whole thing or if people want it split out or what have you. Everyone's fine? Yeah, okay. So let's get a mover and a seconder for that, and then we'll get discussion. Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a problem with it except for the date and whether you want this in writing or verbally. If you're just looking for something verbally, the date may be okay. If you want something in writing, it may be a little too early because the mayor may want to be sure that what he's reporting to us is correct with respect to his other colleagues, and or whether there's a report coming out of it, like minutes or something to that effect. And I may need a little bit more time. So I'm just cautioning you on the date you're asking for. Like I said, if it's just verbal, the date might be okay. So just a thought.
I appreciate you flagging that to Councillor Usher. It looks like it sparked a little bit of conversation there between the mover and the seconder. I'm just going to go to Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I'm supportive of that. As soon as possible is my approach, but certainly something in writing is always better than something verbally. I'm sure if there's urgent items, the mayor could let us know, but I'm happy to amend that to be either February or as soon as possible, but I think it should be one of our next 2 meetings at least. So I'll look to the clerk's guidance on how to best word that into this motion, and I'm happy to be flexible on that.
Okay, we'll let the clerk revise the language. To corporate services at the earliest opportunity. Sound good? Okay. I don't see any other discussion. Let's get it moved and seconded. Thank you very much, Councillor Zaifman, for seconding. I'm going to open up the voting.
Motion carries 5-0.
Let's look to see if there's any other added business. No? Okay, I have a motion to go into closed session. We do have a number of items on the closed session agenda, C1 through C4. We'll do it on the screen. Let's have that moved and seconded, please. Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, let's vote. I thought you were Paul, but thanks for clarifying.
Motion carries 5-0, and we are going in camera for the reasons as stated on the public agenda.
We're going to be in committee room 3. For the media, we'll probably adjourn from the committee room. We'll open the door to let you know when we're finished. Okay.